I never thought I'd own a house like the one we ended up with in Willow Creek. It was everything Emma and I had dreamed of. A cozy little place with 3 bedrooms, a big backyard, and enough space for our 2 kids to run around. We even talked about getting a golden retriever someday, maybe naming him Max or Buddy. The neighborhood seemed perfect, too. Everyone's lawns were neatly trimmed, flowers bloomed in bright colors, and neighbors always waved hello as if they were characters from some happy small-town movie. It felt like stepping into a postcard. But there was something about this picture-perfect setup that gave me a strange feeling, an uneasy kind of excitement mixed with caution. That something turned out to be the Homeowners Association, or HOA. At first, I didn't think much of it. When people mentioned the HOA, I assumed it was just another boring formality, like paying taxes or signing papers when you rent an apartment. Rules are rules, right? What harm could come from keeping things tidy and orderly? So when we got a welcome packet on our second day in the house, I barely glanced at it before tossing it onto the kitchen counter. Emma, though, was more curious. She flipped through the pages while sipping her coffee, her eyes scanning over cheerful pamphlets and colorful charts. "Look," she said, pointing to a section titled * Community Harmony Guidelines *. "They have meetings once a month. Isn't that nice?" Meetings? I groaned, imagining stuffy conference rooms and endless discussions about things no one really cared about. Sounds thrilling. She laughed, but then her expression softened. "Come on, it'll be fun. Besides, don't you want to meet the neighbors? Be part of the community?" Her enthusiasm was hard to resist, so I agreed to give it a shot. Still, something about the whole thing felt off. Maybe it was the way the HOA materials looked, too polished, almost like they were trying too hard to seem friendly. Or maybe it was the phrase community harmony, which sounded less like advice and more like a threat wrapped in glittery wrapping paper. The invitation to the next HOA meeting arrived a week later. It came with a handwritten note reminding us how important it was to attend. "Your voice matters," it read, followed by a smiley face sticker. Emma loved it. I rolled my eyes. But since I'd promised her I'd make an effort, I showed up, wearing my best jeans and carrying a notepad I didn't plan to use. Walking into the meeting room felt surreal. The air buzzed with quiet tension, and everyone sat stiffly around a long wooden table, clutching copies of the HOA handbook like it was sacred scripture. At the front of the room stood Mr. Grayson, the HOA president. He had thinning hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a voice that commanded attention without being warm or inviting. Beside him sat Mrs. Pembroke, a retired schoolteacher who looked like she'd memorized every single rule in that massive handbook and probably graded it for accuracy. When it was time for introductions, Emma nudged me gently. I stood awkwardly, clearing my throat. "Hi, we're the Millers. Just moved in last week. Excited to be here." My words sounded hollow, even to me. Mrs. Pembroke smiled sweetly, but her eyes narrowed slightly. "Welcome to Willow Creek," she said. "We hope you'll follow the guidelines closely. They're there for everyone's benefit." Her tone sent chills down my spine. As the meeting dragged on, I learned about rules I hadn't even considered. No clotheslines visible from the street, no holiday decorations left up past December 31st, and absolutely no painting your front door anything other than beige or gray. By the end, I felt like I'd signed up for military service instead of suburban living. On the drive home, Emma tried to reassure me. "It's not so bad," she said brightly. "Rules keep things nice." But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd stepped into something far bigger and more complicated than either of us realized. The first HOA meeting was supposed to be a chance to meet the neighbors and get a feel for the community. Instead, it felt like walking into a courtroom where everyone except me knew the script by heart. The room was small but formal, with rows of chairs lined up neatly in front of a long wooden table. At the head of the table sat Mr. Grayson, the HOA president, who had an air of authority that made my palms sweat just looking at him. His wiry frame and thinning hair gave him a professorial look, but his sharp voice carried none of the warmth you'd expect from someone welcoming new residents. Beside him was Mrs. Pembroke, who looked like she'd stepped straight out of a 1950s etiquette manual. She wore a pastel sweater set, her silver hair perfectly styled, and clutched a copy of the HOA guidelines as if it were her lifeline. Her smile was polite, but there was a glint in her eye, a mix of curiosity and scrutiny that made me feel like I was being sized up. Emma squeezed my hand under the table before leaning over to whisper, "Relax, it's just a meeting." But it didn't feel like just asterisk anything. As soon as the session began, Mr. Grayson launched into what felt like a monologue about the importance of rules. He spoke passionately, almost obsessively, about how every guideline existed to preserve the integrity of Willow Creek. Words like uniformity, standards, and compliance echoed through the room, making me wonder if we'd accidentally joined some secret society instead of a suburban neighborhood. Then came the part where new residents were asked to introduce themselves. Emma nudged me again, nodding encouragingly. I stood awkwardly, clutching the edge of the table for support. "Hi," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "We're the Millers. Just moved in last week. Excited to be here." Mrs. Pembroke tilted her head, her smile widening just enough to seem genuine. But not quite. "Welcome to Willow Creek," she said, her tone sweet yet firm. "We hope you'll adhere to the guidelines closely. They're there for everyone's benefit." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Everyone else nodded approvingly, as if they'd heard this speech 100 times before. For them, it probably wasn't a big deal. But for me, those few sentences felt like a warning wrapped in a compliment. Adhere, guidelines, benefit. Suddenly, I felt like I'd signed up for something far more intense than I'd bargained for. As the meeting continued, we dove deeper into the specifics of the HOA rules. Some were reasonable enough. No parking RVs on the street, no loud music after 10 p.m., but others left me scratching my head. No clotheslines visible from the road. Really? Who even cared about that? And then there was the list of approved paint colors for front doors. Beige, off-white, light gray. That was it. If you wanted your door to be red or blue or green, forget it. You might as well pack your bags and leave Willow Creek altogether. By the time the queue and a portion rolled around, I was overwhelmed. A few people raised their hands to ask detailed questions about landscaping permits or fence height restrictions. Each answer from Mr. Grayson came with a citation from a handbook, as though he were quoting scripture. It was all so precise, too precise. When the meeting finally ended, I'd practically bolted for the exit, eager to escape the thick cloud of seriousness that had settled over the room. Outside, the evening air felt refreshing compared to the stifling atmosphere inside. Emma caught up with me, her expression calm but curious. "What did you think?" she asked. I hesitated, unsure how to put my feelings into words. "It's a lot," I admitted. "I mean, I get why rules are important, but do they really need to micromanage everything?" She shrugged, brushing off my concerns. "Maybe it's better this way. Keeps things consistent, you know. Like, imagine if someone painted their house neon green or left trash cans out all week. It wouldn't look good." I couldn't argue with that logic, but it still bothered me. Rules were one thing, but this level of control felt suffocating. As we walked back to the car, I glanced at the neatly trimmed lawns and matching mailboxes lining the streets. Everything looked perfect, almost artificial, like a movie set designed to look flawless. And maybe that was the problem. It was too perfect, too controlled, too lifeless. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't stop thinking about what Mrs. Pembroke had said. Asterisk, they're there for everyone's benefit, asterisk, but whose benefit, exactly? The homeowners? Or the HOA itself? It didn't take long for the cracks to show in our shiny, rule-bound neighborhood. One Saturday morning, I decided to tackle the overgrown bushes along our driveway. They'd been bugging me since we moved in, wild and untamed, like something out of a jungle movie. Armed with pruning shears and a podcast playing through my earbuds, I got to work. The sun was warm on my back, and there was something satisfying about shaping those unruly branches into neat lines. For once, I felt like I was making progress, like I was finally putting my stamp on this house. But then, just as I was stepping back to admire my handiwork, I noticed someone standing at the edge of our yard. It was Mrs. Pembroke. Of course it was. She stood there with her arms crossed, her lips pursed, and an expression that could freeze water. "Those bushes," she said, pointing with a gloved finger. "They're still too tall. According to Section 4.2 of the Landscaping Guidelines, all shrubbery must be maintained below 3 feet. I stared at her, dumbfounded. 3 feet. That was barely taller than a coffee table. "Seriously?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. 3 feet. Isn't that a bit extreme? Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. "The rules exist to maintain uniformity. Uniformity is beauty." Uniformity is boring, I thought, but I bit my tongue. Instead, I laughed nervously, assuming she was joking. She wasn't. Over the next few days, I received a formal letter reminding me of the violation and warning of potential fines if I didn't comply. Fines. For trimming bushes. Emma tried to mediate, suggesting we simply cut them shorter. "It's not worth the hassle," she said, brushing crumbs off the kitchen counter. "Just do what they say and move on." But I couldn't let it go. Something about being told how high my bushes could grow rubbed me the wrong way. Wasn't this my asterisk property, my yard? Why did they get to decide every little detail? Then came the day when things took a darker turn. One weekday morning, I opened the door to find 2 HOA representatives, Mr. Grayson and another man I didn't recognize, standing there with clipboards in hand. Their faces were unreadable, but their body language screamed authority. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," Mr. Grayson began, his tone clipped and formal. "We've received reports that you may be storing prohibited items in your garage. We need to inspect it immediately." My stomach dropped. Prohibited items. My garage was nothing more than a cluttered space, filled with tools, bikes, and some old furniture we hadn't gotten around to donating yet. "I'm sorry," I said, crossing my arms. "You can't just barge into my property without permission." Mr. Grayson adjusted his glasses, his lips curling into what might have been a smirk. "Actually, according to Clause 7.8 of the HOA agreement you signed, we reserve the right to conduct inspections to ensure compliance with community standards." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Had I really agreed to this? I couldn't remember reading anything about them having access to my home. Before I could argue further, they'd pushed past me, citing urgent concerns. Furious, I followed them as they made their way to the garage. What happened next still haunts me. As they rummaged through my things, pulling out boxes and inspecting every corner, I noticed Mr. Grayson eyeing my power washer, a piece of equipment I used for weekend projects. Without warning, he grabbed it and announced, "This violates noise ordinances. It's coming with us." That's when everything went sideways. Just as they were wheeling the power washer toward their truck, the side gate creaked open. In walked my Uncle Charlie, who had flown in unexpectedly from Texas to visit. Uncle Charlie is not someone you mess with. He's a retired Marine with a no-nonsense attitude and a fondness for firearms. He'd heard the commotion and came to investigate. When he saw strangers hauling my stuff out of the garage, his face darkened. "What the heck is going on here?" He growled, his hand resting casually, but ominously, on the holster at his hip. The HOA reps froze, their smug expressions melting into panic. Mr. Grayson stuttered something about rules and regulations, but Uncle Charlie cut him off. "You don't take what doesn't belong to you unless you want trouble. Now put that thing back where it belongs." For a moment, nobody moved. Then, slowly, they set the power washer down and backed away, muttering apologies. They scurried off like rats deserting a sinking ship, leaving behind an uneasy silence. As much as I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all, I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The power washer incident should have been the end of it, or so I hoped. But in Willow Creek, nothing ever truly ended. Instead, it lingered, festering like an untreated wound. The HOA didn't come back to confiscate anything else, but their presence loomed over us constantly. It was as if they were watching, waiting for the next opportunity to pounce. Uncle Charlie's arrival had been a blessing in disguise, though his methods weren't exactly subtle. After the showdown in the garage, he insisted on staying for a few more days to keep an eye on things. He set up shop in our guest room, unpacking his duffel bag and laying out what he called his precautionary measures. A baseball bat by the door, a flashlight on the nightstand, and a stern warning that anyone who crossed the line would regret it. "You've got to stand your ground," he told me one evening while we sat on the porch, sipping coffee. "These folks think they're untouchable because they hide behind rules. But rules only work when people agree to follow them. You don't owe them anything if they step out of bounds." His words made sense, but they also scared me. I wasn't built for confrontation. I preferred quiet evenings with Emma and the kids, not shouting matches with neighbors or tense standoffs with clipboard-wielding enforcers. Still, Uncle Charlie's confidence rubbed off on me just enough to make me reconsider my approach. Maybe I had been too passive, letting them push me around without pushing back. But then came the letter. A few days after the garage incident, an official-looking envelope arrived via certified mail. Inside was a formal complaint accusing me of harassment and threatening legal action unless I issued a public apology to the HOA board. Harassment? For defending my property? The audacity of it left me speechless. Emma found me sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the paper. "What is it?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. "They're saying I harassed them," I muttered, handing her the letter. "They want me to apologize for standing up for myself." Her face fell as she read through the document. "This is ridiculous," she said finally. "How can they twist things like this?" I wanted to scream, to throw something, to march down to Mr. Grayson's house and demand answers. But instead, I clenched my fists and took a deep breath. Losing control wouldn't solve anything. It would only give them more ammunition. Uncle Charlie, overhearing our conversation from the living room, joined us at the table. "Let him sue," he said bluntly, slamming his fist on the wooden surface hard enough to rattle the dishes. "Sometimes the only way to deal with bullies is to show 'em you won't back down." His advice was simple, but it carried weight. Over the next few days, we hunkered down, preparing for whatever came next. We reviewed the HOA agreement again, searching for loopholes or ambiguities we could use to our advantage. We installed security cameras around the house, not just for protection, but to document everything. And we reached out to other neighbors, hoping to find allies who might share our frustrations. To my surprise, a few people admitted privately that they were tired of the HOA's strict enforcement. One neighbor confessed that she'd received a similar letter after painting her mailbox pink. Another mentioned how they'd been fined for leaving a welcome mat outside their front door that didn't match the approved color palette. These small acts of rebellion gave me hope, but they also highlighted just how pervasive the problem was. Meanwhile, tensions simmered beneath the surface. Every time I saw Mr. Grayson driving his shiny BMW SUV or Mrs. Pembroke tending to her immaculate flower beds, I felt a fresh surge of anger. They acted like nothing had happened, as if the power washer incident and subsequent threats were all part of a normal day's work. Their casual indifference infuriated me. At night, I lay awake thinking about the situation. Was it worth fighting? Could we really take on an organization that seemed to hold all the cards? Or should we cut our losses and move on? Each option came with its own set of risks and sacrifices, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were stuck between a rock and a hard place. One thing was certain: Willow Creek wasn't the idyllic haven we'd imagined. Beneath its polished exterior lurked a web of control, fear, and resentment, and we were caught right in the middle of it. Word of the power washer incident spread faster than I expected. By the next morning, it felt like the entire neighborhood knew about Uncle Charlie's intervention and the HOA's humiliating retreat. Some neighbors nodded sympathetically when they saw me outside, while others avoided eye contact altogether. A few even whispered behind their hands as I passed by. It was clear that our little showdown had become the talk of Willow Creek, and not everyone was on our side. The tension reached its peak during the annual block party, a supposedly cheerful event designed to bring the community together. Strings of fairy lights hung between lampposts, casting a warm glow over tables piled high with homemade dishes. The smell of grilled burgers and fresh-cut grass filled the air, and upbeat music played softly in the background. On the surface, it seemed like any other neighborhood gathering. But beneath the forced smiles and polite small talk, there was an undercurrent of unease. I tried to blend into the crowd, sticking close to Emma and the kids while keeping one eye on Mr. Grayson and Mrs. Pembroke, who were chatting animatedly near the dessert table. They looked relaxed, almost smug, as if nothing had happened. That irritated me more than anything else. How could they act so casual after everything? Before I could work up the courage to confront them, or at least avoid them completely, Mr. Grayson approached me. He wore a strained smile, his usual air of authority replaced by something resembling discomfort. "Good evening, Mr. Miller," he began, his voice clipped but polite. "Lovely weather we're having, isn't it? Perhaps now is a good time to clear the air and move forward with mutual respect." Mutual respect. After everything they'd done, something inside me snapped. All the frustration, the sleepless nights, the constant feeling of being under siege, it boiled over in a rush of words. Mutual respect. I shot back, my voice rising loud enough to draw attention from nearby guests. "Is that what you call illegally entering my garage and stealing my property? Is that how you treat everyone who dares to question your precious rules?" A hush fell over the crowd. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, forks clattered onto plates, and heads turned in our direction. Neighbors exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to intervene or stay out of it. Mr. Grayson's face turned red, but before he could respond, Uncle Charlie stepped forward, his towering frame casting a shadow over both of us. "You've picked the wrong family to mess with," Uncle Charlie said, his voice low and steady. His hand rested casually, but unmistakably, on the holster at his hip. "If you've got a problem, bring it up in court. Otherwise, leave these folks alone." For a moment, no one moved. The silence was deafening. Then, slowly, Mr. Grayson backed away, muttering something about needing to check on the grill. Mrs. Pembroke followed close behind, her lips pressed into a thin line. As they retreated, the chatter resumed, though it was quieter now, punctuated by furtive glances in our direction. Emma grabbed my arm, pulling me aside. "What are you doing?" she hissed, her eyes wide with concern. "You can't keep making scenes like this." "I'm not starting anything," I replied, my voice tight with frustration. "They're the ones who won't leave us alone." She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I know they're difficult, but escalating things isn't going to help. We need to figure out a way to fix this, not make it worse." Her words hit home, but I couldn't shake the anger bubbling inside me. Every insult, every threat, every petty rule, they all played on repeat in my mind, fueling my resentment. For weeks afterward, life in Willow Creek became unbearable. Anonymous notes appeared on our doorstep, criticizing everything from our lawn care to the color of our curtains. Cars slowed down as they passed our house, drivers craning their necks to gawk. Even the kids started noticing. They complained about classmates whispering behind their backs at school. It wasn't just hostility, it was isolation. We weren't part of the community anymore. We were outsiders, marked as troublemakers. And for the first time, I realized that fighting back might not be enough. Sometimes, Winning the battle means losing the war. The tension in Willow Creek didn't ease. It grew heavier, suffocating us like a storm cloud that refused to break. Every day felt like walking on eggshells, never knowing when the next confrontation would come or who might be watching. It wasn't just the HOA anymore. It was the entire neighborhood. People we'd waved hello to during morning walks now avoided us completely. Others whispered behind their hands as we passed by, their eyes lingering on our house, a constant reminder that we were outsiders. Emma tried her best to keep things normal for the kids, but even she couldn't hide the strain. One evening, after tucking them into bed, she sat down at the kitchen table with tears streaming down her face. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice trembling. "We moved here for a better life, for stability, for happiness. But instead, we're trapped in this nightmare." Her words hit me harder than I expected. Until then, I'd been so focused on fighting back, on proving a point, that I hadn't fully considered what it was costing us. Our family dinners were quieter now, interrupted by awkward silences and unspoken fears. The kids didn't laugh as much, and Emma's usual optimism had faded, replaced by exhaustion. This wasn't the life we dreamed of. This wasn't home. Uncle Charlie, ever perceptive, noticed the toll it was taking on all of us. He pulled me aside one afternoon while we worked on fixing a loose railing on the porch. "You've got fire in you, kid," he said, his tone softer than usual. "But sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away. Fighting isn't always worth the cost." His words stayed with me long after he went inside. For days, I wrestled with the idea of leaving Willow Creek. Part of me wanted to stay, to prove that we weren't wrong, that the HOA's rules were ridiculous and unfair. But another part of me knew Uncle Charlie was right. Staying meant letting the anger consume us. It meant dragging our family through endless battles that wouldn't bring peace, only more resentment. Finally, Emma and I sat down together to talk it through. "What if we sold the house?" she asked hesitantly, as if afraid of my reaction. "It's not giving up. It's choosing us. Choosing our family." I nodded slowly, realizing she was right. We'd put so much energy into defending ourselves against the HOA that we'd forgotten why we bought the house in the first place, to build a life together. And if that life wasn't possible here, then maybe it was time to start over somewhere else. Making the decision was one thing, actually doing it was another. Packing up our belongings felt surreal, like dismantling pieces of a dream we'd barely had time to live. As boxes piled up in every room, memories flooded back. The excitement of moving in, the laughter-filled evenings on the porch, the quiet moments watching the sunset over the backyard. Despite everything, there were good times here too. Times I wished I could hold on to. On moving day, neighbors gathered outside their houses, some openly staring, others pretending not to notice. A few offered polite goodbyes, though their smiles seemed forced. Mr. Grayson drove by slowly in his BMW, his expression unreadable. Mrs. Pembroke stood at the edge of her yard, arms crossed, her gaze fixed firmly on the ground. As we loaded the last box into the moving truck, I took one final look at the house. It still looked beautiful, bathed in golden sunlight, its white picket fence gleaming against the lush green lawn. In a way, it was perfect, the kind of place you'd see in a magazine spread. But perfection, I realized, doesn't mean happiness. Not unless you feel free within those four walls. Driving away from Willow Creek was bittersweet. There was sadness, yes, but also relief, a sense that we were finally escaping something that had held us captive for far too long. As the neighborhood disappeared in the rearview mirror, I reached for Emma's hand and squeezed it tightly. "We'll find somewhere better," I promised her, "somewhere real." And for the first time in months, I believed it. We eventually settled in a smaller town about 2 hours away from Willow Creek. It wasn't as polished or picture-perfect as our old neighborhood, but that was exactly what we loved about it. The houses here were a mix of styles, some with bright blue doors, others with wildflower gardens spilling onto the sidewalks. There were no HOAs, no rule books dictating how high your bushes should be or what color your mailbox had to be. Life felt real. The first thing we did after moving in was paint our front door a cheerful shade of red, a bold choice that would have sent Mrs. Pembroke into a tailspin back in Willow Creek. Emma smiled as she stepped back to admire it. "It's perfect," she said, brushing a strand of hair out of her face. For the first time in months, her voice sounded light, almost carefree. The kids adjusted quickly, too. They made friends at school within weeks, bonding over shared lunches and playground games. One afternoon, I came home to find them racing bikes down the street with a group of neighborhood children, their laughter echoing through the air. It was a sound I hadn't realized I'd missed until I heard it again. Uncle Charlie visited us once we were settled. He walked around the house, inspecting every corner before nodding approvingly. "This is a good place," he said, patting me on the shoulder. "You've got room to breathe here." He was right. This new town didn't feel suffocating like Willow Creek had. Neighbors greeted us warmly without judgment, inviting us to barbecues and holiday gatherings. No one cared if our lawn wasn't perfectly manicured, or if we left Halloween decorations up until Thanksgiving. Here, people valued kindness over control, and it made all the difference. Still, I couldn't help but reflect on everything we'd been through. Willow Creek had taught me lessons I never expected to learn. I realized that rules aren't inherently bad. They can provide structure and keep communities safe. But when those rules become more important than the people they're supposed to serve, something gets lost. Freedom, individuality, humanity. It all fades under the weight of enforcement. Emma often reminded me not to dwell too much on the past. "We're here now," she'd say whenever I brought up the HOA. "Let's focus on making this place feel like home." And slowly we did. We planted a small garden in the backyard, added wind chimes to the porch, and hung family photos on the walls. Each change felt like reclaiming a piece of ourselves that we'd lost in Willow Creek. One evening, as we sat outside watching the sunset, Emma turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd stayed?" I shook my head. Not really. Staying would have meant letting them win, not just the HOA, but the idea that following rules is more important than being happy. Leaving gave us a second chance. She smiled softly, leaning her head against my shoulder. "You're right. Sometimes starting over is the best way to move forward." Looking back, I know we made the right decision. Willow Creek will always hold a strange place in my memory, a reminder of both beauty and frustration, of dreams shattered and lessons learned. But this new town, this is where we belong. Here, there's no need for uniforms or compliance, just life, messy and imperfect, but ours. And isn't that what home is supposed to be? Not a set of rules or guidelines, but a place where you can truly be yourself. A place where love grows freely, without boundaries or restrictions. That's what we found here, and nothing could take that away from us.